Hey everybody, I'm Brian Holler. This is Aaron Washington. We're Some Guys Talking. Hope you're all doing great today. Nice to see you, Aaron. How's things?
Nice to see you, Brian. Things are well.
Good.
How are
Very
you?
awesome. I'm good. You know, what are you doing? No, hey, thanks for joining us, everybody. I hope you're having a great day. Today we are going to talk about loneliness, which is a very exciting and fun topic to dig into. We're really excited about. No, it should be it's an important thing to talk about, so we wanted to figure out a way to talk about it. So you'll just have to clunk through this with us as well. But first, let's get down to business. Aaron, how's things? How's rooted intellect? How's work, life,
Things are
etc.
going well. Rooted Intellect is actually, we got some great news that we thought it was going to be 8 weeks to having our product ready, and it is actually 4 weeks. So we are going to be ready and into our Amazon store and a TikTok store. We got great content that just steers people right there. So that's going great. And
Nice.
things with Arrow are going fantastic. I shot some amazing Araya gummies last week. So yeah, all is going fantastic.
Very good to hear. Things are good on the Beard Bros end as well. We continue to progress and grow, and we've got that great LinkedIn live series that's going. The next show of which, Chelsea did her show last Friday. It was fantastic with Lissa, and it was a really, really great conversation. You can go check that out on LinkedIn and Beard Bros, all sorts of fun places. And then our next one is a week from Friday, not this Friday, but a week from Friday with Angela Pye. She'll be debuting her new show, Branding Like a Boss. So it'll be fantastic. David Palichuk's on there, so it'll be a fantastic conversation. So we're definitely looking forward to that. And yeah, things continue to grow that way. It's interesting. The topic today is loneliness, right? It's something I am fortunate to not feel as much of in a professional standpoint, especially in the last several years. One great thing I love about working in cannabis, and now that you've put a decent number of years in there, and you have some really solid colleagues, connections, friends, people you care about,
Mm-hmm.
it's a we're all in this sort of thing together, so it does breed a lot of really close relationships, I think. Being
Yes.
in this together, this one right here is evidence of that as well. And I will say it's very nice to be in a field where I don't know, like it truly it's not a some people use their career sometimes to like cure their loneliness or
Mhm.
to like address it in a way that's maybe not as healthy. I think because of the community that you build when you're in um, our field, it cures it in a good way. I don't know if I'm saying
Mhm.
that. Do you get what I'm
Mhm.
saying?
Mhm.
It's not something that people use to distract. It's inherent in the relationships you have in the space because everybody really truly cares about each other because it's tough.
Well, one of the things, and it's that 100% because it's a grind. We joke in the cannabis industry that 1 year is like seven, or at least, well, I know I do think 1 year feels at least like three. But also
Yes,
one of the
I'm
things
down
that
for about 7 though. That's good. You know.
yeah. So you're so wait, how long you been in the industry?
Me, about 7. You guys, 7 years.
Oh, all right. So you said seven. All right. So then it feels like you should be 21 years in. That's what it
Right.
feels like.
Yeah. No, I just meant that's getting less as we get
Right.
closer to some sort of semblance of
Normalcy.
structure and stuff and normalcy, I suppose, if that's the word to use. But
Um,
yeah,
but I want to let me add something. But I think more importantly, one of the things in this community is that cannabis helps foster empath thoughts. It makes you more open to people experiences. That's why the running joke is that if you go to a party, the person who smells like weed is probably the safest person that you want to be around because
sure.
they're not going to do you any harm. They probably
Nope.
just want to hug
Sure.
or talk your ear off or say some. But
Maybe.
I think that's part of it, that there is with the wellness routine of cannabis, there is a mindfulness and understanding, at least for me, that that we're all kind of in this journey together and you want to help those around you, which leads right into loneliness of just feeling isolated.
Yes. It's interesting because another side of that though is like tons of us work from home or have like
Yeah,
hybrid schedules or these
100%.
sorts of things. So that can breed loneliness too if you don't, work actual conversation into your meetings and stuff.
Mhm.
That's a big one, especially if you have a really busy sort of hectic schedule or all over the place like I and many others I know do. It's really important to check in with each other. Usually, I think everybody I speak with every day, it's a how are you, how's things before we dig into stuff.
Mm.
It's
Mm.
funny. I can think of, and I'm going to give a shout out to Kat because she's wonderful, and she knows who she is. Um, uh, but that's the last meeting I can think of that I had where I didn't do that, and thankfully, Kat was on the call to remind us all to do that with one another. And so
Right.
uh, that was a great call for me because a lot of reasons, but but it also reminded me of, hey, you do that all the time. When you don't do it, I'm glad somebody was there to catch us on it because it's important, and how's everybody? Plus, there were some people on there who we'd never met before, so intros actually were in order.
Right on.
But I just hopping in, flying a million miles a minute. All right, everybody, how's it going? Let's do the thing. Da, da, da. Oh yeah, calm it down, kid. Right, and so my point is those little things that a lot of times could be eye roll or you're not thinking about because you're really flying fast are probably the most important things because
Hmm.
they really do make it more for in a day like more real. Like,
Yeah.
oh, I remember those pieces of those conversations on a personal level, and then I remember the professional things like calls to action and moving the project along or whatever it is. But I don't know. Those are important things to do in my opinion.
Well, because I think at some point, in some ways, and it just like popped into my head, is that with work and remote work, sometimes you forget that people are human beings, that they have like, you think of like their job and their title and blah blah blah.
Sure.
And that's why, again, whenever I like to talk to anyone, it's like, how are you doing, what's going on with you, or just and what actually, and one of the things is when I get to know people, probably one of the first questions I ask them is like, what types of things make you smile, like what makes you happy,
Right.
before we get into any kind of work or anything like that. I want to know you as a person, like what kind of stuff, because that's the thing, like we tend to think of people as their job or whatever, and we
Sure.
forget that they are human beings and have like, and I think, you know what, and probably some of the lonely, and this is my head is just swimming with thoughts, is that if we understood, we look at our society right now and everything is hyper partisan, and if we looked at that, we probably have 95% of things in common with each other. It's just these few things that people are so tribal about, and like we're all pitted against each other. But that's the thing, like if we all kind of remember, like the people on the other side of like whatever, if you ask them what makes you happy, oh, I love my family, I like to this, or this
Same
makes me
stuff.
laugh,
That's right.
you find that you have, so that's one of the things. But I think one of
I
the,
also think I also
in
think it's
this
important.
society, we're forced to do that tribal thing where we're like, we look past our own connections, our own similarities, to our differences, and that's what makes us up. What were you going to say?
I'm agreeing with that, and I'll just piggyback off it and say, and those things that you now feel like you can't talk about breed loneliness,
Yeah.
and they're sort of meant to, because I would I would gather to say the powers that be don't want us to talk about those things, hence the divisive nature of how things are sort of presented to
Right.
us,
Yeah.
right? It's not
Mhm.
presented in a way that's constructive, even
Mhm.
though in our private conversations or our business conversations, we have all sorts of tools and mechanisms to make sure that that's happening.
Mhm.
Especially when a sensitive conversation needs to take place, right?
Mhm.
But of course, in our media, we just and
Surface and all, just it's not, there's, well, one thing, there's no nuance, but carry on.
right. And so again, that's and then we force people not to be able to feel like they can't talk about things with people that they're curious about. Not only does it breed loneliness, it breeds frustration and anger, and then that's where you get those extremes, and then you start really thinking of people not as people, and it can lead to some really bad spots. So
Yes. Yeah.
again, it really goes like loneliness can be in part, I don't say cured,
Mhm.
but helped along by discussing the things that you really, really want to talk about or that you're confused about.
Right.
Sometimes the fear among that causes you to feel lonely.
Okay. So can I jump off of that point? Because I think, there's like we need to go back because like nobody has acknowledged that there is been damage done from COVID in that period of isolation. There has been irreparable damage that has been done to people in that loneliness, in that fear. And whether it's just substance abuse or whatever it is, like there was a lot of just like, and again, yes, it was a very scary time. And I think that for a lot of individuals who found themselves in a scary time and realizing that life is very fragile and unpredictable, that a lot of people kind of got broken. And so instead of feeling that fear that they feel, they gave that up to somebody else. And it's not like to go politically about like Trump or anything like that, whatever. Because my thing right now is moving beyond just the like outrage at people acting a fool and calling names or whatever. Like now it's trying to reach on a human level because I'm feeling bad for some like the stuff that is going on because like what you were saying, and we don't have to jump into it, you like what you alluded to earlier, that there are forces that are working to keep everyone fighting each other and angry with each other. So we don't realize that like we're all at times in a tough spot. And instead of like fighting, we should like foster, love and moving forward with everyone. So I won't go too deep into that. But it's just like we have to acknowledge the fact like that there was a huge segment that was broken in the pandemic, and we all have like some kind of issue or trauma or something from the pandemic because it was a really scary, awkward time. um but I think that like that is where we kind of need to start, because we see like so many people let themselves be susceptible to bad actors who don't necessarily have their best interest at heart, but they will speak to them and soothe them. So that kind of like there's a lot of damage that was just done in the pandemic that we just haven't even acknowledged. We just kind of moved on and we're not wearing masks and whatever. But there's a lot of funky shit that came out, and a lot of conversations that I had with people after that, that there is a lot of funky shit going on. And I'm really glad that I got all my demons in my shit in order, like before that crazy time. And I know things happen for a reason, because if I was still doing what I was doing in that time, I wouldn't be here now. I know that for a fact. Like, thankfully, I got on the road I needed to be on, like right before that. But anyway, what's your thoughts just on the pandemic and just kind of the damage that has been done with it, whether it's fractured relationships or, people looking to crazy sources to validate their whatever fears and make them feel comfy?
Right. I mean, it definitely brought out, I don't know, I feel like a lot of people say it brought out sort of lingering things that you hadn't dealt with.
Hmm.
Um, or it showed you that you were resilient, and maybe
Hmm.
some of the things that you had been working on are good for you, and can make it through something as crazy and strange and awkward as that. I also think that it caused a lot of people to be lonely and depressed.
Hmm.
And that would make sense because I think a lot of people in the country are lonely and depressed.
And that's
And
the point. I don't think that we've dealt with it. You can't acknowledge, if you don't acknowledge something, then you cannot overcome it. And I don't think that that a lot of people have even acknowledged that fact. So that's kind of like the starting point of. But continue your point.
no, sure. I mean, I just think that I think that was maybe always there, and then it just amplified it through that couple of years,
Hmm.
right? And of course, there was a lot of things that happened during that time that made you feel even more so that way. All sorts of stuff,
Hmm.
and that's a whole nother like lane of stuff that we can talk about. To your point, really, just trying to talk about how loneliness has been, bred in the macro, and inner, right? So ultimately, do you have some control over, you feeling lonely? I mean, yeah, to a degree, but are there a lot of external reasons and pressures and strangeness that might make you feel more that way than you should? Yes. So it's important to acknowledge that too, I think.
Hmm. Hmm.
I also think that there's a lot of different, like, what makes somebody happy? Well, what do you like? And then somebody will say, well, what I'm supposed to, if I do what I'm supposed to do, but who says what you're supposed to do?
Hmm.
Right? I mean, as long as you're not hurting people or, causing pain or, lying and manipulating, that sort of a thing, what makes you happy doesn't necessarily need to be what makes the other person happy. It's just important that you're happy, right?
Hmm.
I think loneliness often is caused by people thinking they're doing like they're not doing what they're quote unquote supposed to do,
Hmm.
even though I would argue there really isn't any supposed to. And I mean, beyond just sort of, I don't know, societal norms or just, like I said, this like threshold of being a good human being to one another, right? Or
Like,
I'll even say decent
give
human
me an
being.
example of that, to expand on your point, like supposed to doing. I just want to understand it, like, as best I can.
Well, what I mean is, I mean, obviously, I think everybody has an ideal of how they want to behave, whether that's influenced by your
Hmm.
religious beliefs, your community, your family. We grow and we learn sort of what we want to aspire to be. But we also need to learn to be okay with where we're at currently,
Hmm.
and it's okay to aspire to more. But you should feel comfortable with who you are as you're trying to do that. And then there's of course this sort of set of like understood things like hey, we shouldn't kill people, even though people do, but we shouldn't, right? Or hey, we shouldn't, hurt people, even though people do, right?
Hmm.
Physically and mentally, right? But
Hmm.
I think most of us know, and it's not to say that we don't do it still, or occasionally screw up. But I'd say a lot of people sort of have this sort of, I guess, moral lines, and there's a little gray area and some flexibility there. But for the most part, there's sort of a baseline that we all understand. That,
Hmm.
or I won't say all, but the vast,
The
vast
vast,
majority of people understand. Um, and then you create sort of the gray area is what you do for yourself, like how important is, you know, then you can get into concepts that are a little more fuzzy, like marriage. Do you have
yeah.
to be married to be
Hmm.
happy? I don't think
Hmm.
so, right?
Hmm.
But can marriage make you happy or help you be happy? Sure, of course. So can any good relationship. And
Hmm.
so no matter what kind of boundaries or
Hmm.
definitions you put on it, right? But do you have to get married to be happy? Well, I think that screws with some people sometimes. And then of course then you're like maybe your ideas of being happy are wrapped in getting married,
Right.
right? Ergo, if you're not married, you're lonely and sad,
Right. Yeah.
right? But most people I would think understand there's a little bit of gray there. Like even
Hmm.
people like, I want to get married, but it doesn't mean I can't be content or happy as single
Right.
or in an early relationship or just dating or whatever you're doing,
Mm.
I think those are the people that succeed in the relationships ultimately because they're good with themselves. They know how to end up talking to people. My point is that no matter what, I think we all create an idea in our head of what we want for our lives. And if
Hmm.
we don't get large elements of that or they're not where they need to be, that can
Hmm.
breed loneliness. But I
Hmm.
think it's important to note that you actually have some control over whether or not those things quote unquote make you happy or sad or lonely or not.
Interesting. No, I get it. So yeah, because you have your own expectations, and if you don't think that you're fitting in with society's norms or where you're supposed to be, then you're a failure. And that's well. Let's look at. I mean, because obviously loneliness, and this is why it was a topic when we both like
Good
it came
laugh.
up. We were like, yeah, this one could be like clunky. It could be emotional or whatever. Because you have to look at your own shit and but it's important because we need to acknowledge like literally every single one of us have felt lonely, do feel lonely, often felt lonely, know what the feeling of loneliness and isolation is. um and I guess it's important to kind of have an understand. Well, caveat, I used to hate this is the interesting part. When I was drinking, I hated being alone. I hated being alone. One of the reasons why I drank, it's like, oh, I'm just here with me and I just have to like listen to this person. But now, oh my God, I do love being by myself. I mean, I will stay up and it's like the family goes to bed. I just need a couple hours just in the silence, whether it's listening to music in the dark or whatever, just to feel like I need that. But
Right.
but part of that is I think that a lot, and I'm not saying I don't feel lonely and isolated, but a part of that is kind of working on my wellness to know, times when I am alone, that it's okay to be alone. Like I think there were times when literally when it was just me and my kids would leave and go off to school, it's like, oh, it's just me. Who am I? And then all this shit would come like into my head. So I guess kind of it's important to I guess it's important to understand the things that can make you lonely and to acknowledge it, because I know for myself when there were things that I should have acknowledged, I'm like, don't worry about it. And you can't do that. Because again, I've said it before, you deal with your shit or your shit's gonna deal with you. And that was what it was. So I
That's
guess
true.
maybe to be mindful and recognize and be okay with the times when you are lonely, to say, "Oh, I'm kind of lonely right now," and maybe it's a little too early for the call to action, but maybe to call someone and let people know that you are feeling lonely. Because I guarantee you call a couple people, one of them's going to be like, "You know what? I'm feeling lonely too, man. Let's have a conversation. Let's."
Right.
So
Well, and
sorry,
again,
I have gone off on a tangent there.
no, I mean that is a CTA for to begin to address your, like, again, it goes back to a lot of things we say. If you're not comfortable with yourself, that's going to probably cause you to lean into loneliness a little bit more. If you're, not comfortable with where you are in life, that could be where you are in life. That could be a problem too. That could breed that too. And if you're not willing to ask for help or to say what's going on in your life, that can be a problem too. And all of those things are themes of this show that we talk about, that we've either talked about specifically each of those examples, or they seem to always come up as ways to help address some of these tougher,
Mhm.
things that we all deal with, like loneliness. I mean, for me, loneliness is something I've sort of had to really examine a lot in my life. I don't come from a big family in the first place, and then I shot out like a cannon at 17 and didn't really ever look back. I mean, I certainly love my family and was in touch with them and all that stuff, but at the same time, they went through a lot of terrible stuff that I, often had to go back for, but there wasn't really a family unit in that
Yeah,
way.
right.
I never really had that anyways. And that's all I really wanted. And so for me, I had to come to grips with the fact that I'm not going to have that, period, especially after my dad died. And so it was like, well, ultimately I had to figure out what, I was used to being alone. I don't have a problem with being alone,
Mhm.
but once I started having those realizations, I started to feel lonely, right?
Mm.
So it wasn't so much like I didn't know that, like, and so sometimes that's another thing we should talk about is sometimes you can feel lonely even when you have all the support in the world, or when you be in a room full of people feeling
I was
lonely.
gonna go there, but
You can be in a
we
relationship,
definitely got
you can
that.
be in a relationship and feel lonely,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Because
yeah.
you're either not getting what you want out of it, or you're not able to talk about the things that are difficult or that are plaguing you, or you feel trapped in some form or
That's
fashion.
what popped into my head of the different types, like whether it's work loneliness or
Yeah,
relationship loneliness, like you
yeah,
could have, or whatever. Like you just like there are the different types that
yeah.
will the different situations that you find yourself in that reaching for
Yeah, it's not
help.
as simple as like, oh, I'm alone. Well, then let me not be lonely. No, lonely is a feeling. It's a state of being. It's not necessarily functionally, hi, I'm not lonely because I have Aaron right now. I'm talking to him. I could feel lonely right now, even
Right.
through talking to Aaron and having a meeting full of people and going to see friends later today and hanging out at the bar with a bunch of people or whatever the heck I'm doing. You can still feel lonely, right?
Mhm.
Because something's missing from what you need or whatever, or you just don't know if you're in the right spot, or you're not around the right people. Fortunately, if you're around the right people, you probably won't feel lonely,
You know
because
what?
that's a pretty big one too.
I just something you just made me think of this, and it's the reason. So before we got on the call, I was telling you just kind of what's going on, and I've mentioned it in a couple places, just that
Mhm.
I'm dealing with a sick parent, and it's gone faster than I could have ever imagined. Like I'm gobsmacked, to be perfectly honest with you.
Yeah.
Um, but with that, it was like, and I have therapy at 10. So I'm like, yeah, it's kind of a rough day, talking like hospital, all that stuff. And then it's like, I don't really have it in me to encourage anyone today. But the thing is, like, I think in the back of my mind, it's like, this is what you need to do. Like, don't sit in your own whatever. like there's a benefit to be, and it's like, oh, loneliness, that makes sense, that I didn't isolate myself in my own loneliness, which it would have been more uncomfortable or more comfortable to do that and not jump in this. But it's like, I think subconsciously it's like, no, this is what you have to do.
Oh yeah, I mean, sometimes again, it's funny. I do a lot of things in a week for job, work, like, life, whatever. This show sometimes can be the hardest thing I do, and it's funny because it's not. It's like we don't get this isn't the thing I do that gets the most attention every week. Either it is for it's not either for you either. It's not either for you. It's not for you either. And so, but like I do feel like it's therapeutic to talk to you, and to talk in this
Hopefully
way.
people appreciate it.
I hope
Actually, I had
it's
someone
good for
I had
us, so I don't
say that.
mind. But like
Say that again?
it's good for us. So I mean, that's what I mean. That's an important thing too, right?
I
Anyhow,
had someone actually encourage and said that they got a lot out of what we're doing. So
yeah,
I thought
no,
that was
I've been
very nice.
very fortunate to hear some
Sometimes
really
you feel
nice
like you're
things from
shouting into like whatever, but go
the
ahead.
abyss. Yes, no, like there have definitely been some kind folks that have said a lot of great things, and people are checking it out. I mean, I'm fibbing a little. We have gotten steady views as we've gone, but I think just Aaron and I are professionals. We know what we could do to get this show going, and I think we're just it's about purposely being uncomfortable. I think and going and pushing, not pushing through, but like and let allowing yourself to go through that is generally speaking therapeutic. Even if we don't talk about the exact things that are plaguing me that day, right, or that are in my mind that day, having these conversations just helps in general. It helps me sort of, I don't know, remind myself that we're all human and that we're all kind of going through stuff, and it's tough out there for everybody, and and just try your best. It's been good. So again, anti loneliness is for me and Aaron, I think, is in part this show. This
That's
what
where
we're
the show. That's actually where the first. That's where the show started.
Yeah.
Is that we're all dealing with stuff. We all need a little bit of help. That's literally that's what we started.
Yeah.
That was in the first, like, you know what, we could, because they're like, we're helping each other and we're figuring some stuff out. But
Well,
let's look at the different types, because if you're in a work situation and
sure.
may feel lonely, that you don't fit or whatever, like there are different types of loneliness, and it's all something that we experience at some time or not. And sometimes people, you can find yourselves just living in that space. And just really quickly, and that's why for me personally, I've always said to people, now again in another show, I'm not one to ask for help, but I'm always there to give it, because and it may be like not trauma, because whatever, but I will never forget the feeling of isolation. And anyone who's been in any kind of addiction or whatever knows that feeling of isolation. Like literally the entire world is going on and you're just stuck in this place and nobody's checking for you. So that's the one thing with loneliness that I've always said, like, give me a shout, anything, like, no, don't, before you make any decisions, call whatever, call me, because I don't. And that's also probably the former drinker thing, where I'm like, nope, I don't want anyone, like, call me before you make any bad decisions, because you're gonna have to deal with that bad decision, and then like you're gonna have to work your way out of it and then deal with made you drink in the first place. But whatever it is, I think that's something that stayed with me, that just I never want anyone to feel lonely or just like that no one cares, because it fucking sucks. Just that feeling is.
And there's still and again, there's a ton of truth to those of, at least in my case, I'll just speak for myself. I tend to be encouraging that way too. I tend to be somebody who wants to remind folks they're not alone. If I sense that you're having some issues, I'll at least ask. If you don't want to talk about it, that's fine. I'm not going to push too hard. But ultimately, I will sense it. I'll notice. But that's because I have felt that way plenty of times.
Right.
The reason I am more apt to be that way with people is because I know what that's like. So I also have to be cognizant of like, oh, is this actually the other person, or is this me, right? Projecting or assuming more is going on than there is, or right. So obviously I have to recognize that's a sensitivity for me. So when I see other people experiencing things like isolation or loneliness, I'm going to be like extra double apt.
You're tuned into it.
I'm going to be really tuned into that. So I have to be cognizant of that for myself too, because not everybody's feeling it the same way you do. You know what I mean? Like it's not all dire and destruction for everybody all the time. And I know that too. That's usually what I'm saying to people when I'm trying to encourage them when they need it. Right? Is to say, hey, it's going to be all right. You know, like don't worry. You know, those all the things. But then you don't need to hear that when you don't need to hear that. Does that make sense?
Right. So, you don't want to read into that. I'm just laughing because I
drop something on somebody when it's not even there in the first place, right? Maybe it was this much for them, and then you're like, oh, what's going on? And now it's this much for them because like, well, I wasn't thinking of that, you know, and like, you know, and you're like, oh shit, no, I like, you know, that can be.
You're like, hey, are you depressed about that? You're like, no, I wasn't until you mentioned it.
Yeah, and then now you're mentioning it though. You know, exactly right. Like, fuck shit. You know, like, sorry. You know, anyways, you got to be careful about that sort of thing. But
and I also forget that being an empath, and I'm an Aquarius, so you can read my emotion. I want to like take care of it. I forget that people have boundaries and walls. It's like
right, like yeah. Sometimes also you're not required to take care of everybody,
right?
As well. Oh, I'm not. Okay, that's right. You know
what?
Like,
I literally heard that in therapy this morning. I like that. Say that again. You're not required to.
You're not required to take care of everybody. You're only really required to take care of one and maybe a couple other folks or a few other folks that are close by. But yes, depending on your agreements and arrangements in life. But anyhow, yes, the only one. There's not too many people that. Again, I have that. I think you either have that compulsion or you have the opposite, where you're like, ugh, everything is like just, you know, even just helping somebody once is like, ugh, you know. But for me, it's the more like I want to take everybody with me. I want everybody to be happy. Let's go. Like unrealistic as hell.
It's the second time I've heard that. Matt, you were the second person to say that today, so I appreciate that.
Oh, it's just. But I am that. Like the reason I'm so passionate about that is because I struggle with that. I want everybody to come with. I want to take care of everybody. I want everybody to be happy. I want the whole, you know, I'll fix everything. Give me the conch. I'll do it.
Yeah, you know, stand back. I'll do it.
Yeah,
that's not possible.
And I think there's elements of being that person that are great, and you want to hold on to those. And there's things you can nurture and really hold your head on. But then there's some you know some cons
it'll burn you out.
So you better be aware of those too. You're right. Like I'm not saying I'm not that guy. I'm just saying I'm trying to be self-aware that I'm that guy.
I received that. I like that.
Again, that's another thing to bring it back to loneliness, is having that sort of awareness of yourself is really key. And I know we just beat this drum all the time, but we have to, because there's like loneliness hasn't become less of a thing.
No,
it's become more of a thing.
No, it literally, say that again, because I think we have to acknowledge that fact. Like we are probably right now, like more lonely. Oh, there's the cardinal. You were always hanging out. Hey, non. Sorry, I get distracted. Squirrel. What I was saying. I did forget what I was saying. Go ahead.
Well, you were just talking about how it's important to say that loneliness is
it is worth now, just with everything being like partisan and just a lot of vitriol.
Right, there's more people lonely now than before, but we don't want to acknowledge that because now we're more sensitive to loneliness, which is ironic, right? Which is why we would say we don't want to mention it. Although we don't seem to have any problem, throwing horrible kind of discourse into the proceedings that cause people to be frustrated or to shock people into wanting to believe a certain thing or another based on, images or, language that's being used. So it's, as usual, a lot of folks are talking out of both sides of their mouth when they're presenting us with things. I think a lot of people were taught to rely on the sources that provide you with messaging in a way that was very unhealthy. And now we're experiencing a vast majority of people, or a large majority of people, who understand that no, this is their businesses, so they have reasons to sort of position messaging this way. Also, don't watch a shitload of it either if you can help it. And then, but you also are juxtaposing that with still this. There's still a large portion of people who trust their resources, their sources, right? Which again, well, how does this lead to loneliness? Here's how: it causes extreme viewpoints. Extreme viewpoints lead to loneliness. Why?
Well, and I was
Lots of
going to ask a
discourse and
question.
lots of this. You don't feel like you can talk about the things that are really going on because you're afraid you don't want to like ruffle feathers or whatever. It's already happening. Like that when that happens, when you are just encouraged to restrict conversation, and I won't get into conspiracy and how far where that goes after a while, but my point is that's the first step towards a really bad stuff.
I got a
And
question for you.
the way we nail that is to basically we have to talk about the things. Is my point. Go ahead.
I have a question for you because a thought popped into my head as you were speaking. It's like the world, and maybe I'm inaccurate. The world has gotten smaller because it's more
Yes.
tribal. It's more. The world has gotten smaller,
Also
which is
technology.
insane. With
I mean,
all the information and technology we have, the world as it has effectively gotten smaller. Each tribe knows they're safe people and who's not going to get them killed or caught, whatever. That like the
yep.
world has gotten smaller. That is absolutely insane to me.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, it has, and so
Your
and
sources of information are smaller. Your people that
are
you
much more
interact with
sensitive,
are
of
smaller.
course,
Your
right?
family members that you want to deal with are small. That's crazy to me.
All of it.
That's
You're
crazy.
able to see and feel more of it because maybe they have social media and like even though that's totally what you want, what people want to show people, there's still things you can gather from it and still learn from people. Anyways, it feels like everything's closer. Yes, it feels like all the things that and which makes the stuff that we usually do even scarier, right? Plus now it's amplified times a million, so you're not just seeing it on the local news or the national news. You see it on every social media platform. You're texted it. It's on all the national and local news and the cable news too, and it's everywhere. And you can't run away from it sometimes, or you feel like you can't because in order to do that, you have to completely shut off yourself from all technology at least for a while, which is great to do when you can get a weekend away, but not very realistic considering how we live our lives now, right? So yeah, you can avoid social media and stuff, but you're still going to need, I don't know, emails, GPS. I mean, there's a number of things that you're not going to run away from because you need them. Access to buy things easily, all sorts of stuff. So anyhow, point is, it's closer, and I think there's advantages to that we've lost because the low hanging fruit was to divide, amplify, like to do like what we're like again. I don't know if anybody remembers, but when social media first started kind of getting around, there was a lot of like good things that people did. Yeah, we reported news and certainly different things, kind of reared their ugly head.
We actually reconnect. Actually, the world got bigger because the
Right.
world allowed me to like reconnect with like people like buddies. Got like coming from the pre-cell phone era when all of my buddies in college. It's like if you didn't have, I mean, we all knew what towns we had to that we came from because it was just part of you had to learn it. But it was like to get a hold of someone, you would have to call their parents and be like, "Hey, where's this?" So that was the great part. The world got bigger. But now it's like literally, and that now you're basically only safe in your tribe. That's how it still blows my mind.
I don't know. I mean, you're right, but there's also a large portion of people that recognize that they're part of many tribes and that there's that there's a like what is that definition, and there's a lot of exploration around this, which is in a positive way, healthy way. But we don't want to talk about those sorts of things because they don't get clicks and things. So again, like I hope that's changing. I do feel like I see some evidence that that sort of stuff is sort of
I hope so. My God, I
people
hope so.
people I don't think you can't not at least be a little more savvy to the fact that this happens now, at least a larger portion of people. So to a degree, while it's can be disheartening and even lonely to realize that most of what you're told is marketing or propaganda or leaning towards whatever point has the most benefit for the business or organization that's putting forth the messaging. But I would argue that's not necessarily a bad thing for us to know that. Yeah, it's a little more work for us to like have to figure out sort of how to form our own plans. That's
like
a good
real-
thing. You know, it forces you to, you know, go, well, this is BS because they lean this way, and this is sort of BS because we know they're in the back here. But they are telling us things in a way that's important, so we want to take this message. So I look at it sort of like a puzzle. It shouldn't be that way. You're right. You should be able to trust, you know, what's being said to you, and it should be done for the betterment of society so that like everybody can understand it, whatever learning style they are. You know, obviously language is used to, you know, confuse and manipulate a lot of times, right? So again,
and that's why we don't have a $50 million contract to
yeah.
use.
And so right. And so again, and back to the loneliness. These are all the things that sort of conspire, not even sometimes purposely or purposefully, I should say, to create that. It's, I think, our internal frustration with everything and a perceived inability to express it. And I think you have that on a large front right now for good and bad reasons. You know, should you be more cognizant of what you say? Yeah. Like, I think it's very telling that a lot of people are just mad that they can't be racist anymore. Because people will call them on their bullshit.
The other day, and it's like there's one thing that it's just like it's like people just get mad like because they can't say that word, and it's like
but to be fair,
you guys get to say it. It's like yeah, we get to say it to each other,
right? And I agree with that one. Like I agree that like if hey, I always was like that even when I was younger. I was like, hey, if you're so proud to be a racist, then be one. Let's see you. Yeah. You know, why you think you got to hide it?
That's
the whole reason they have to hide. They feel like they have to hide it because, well, people won't understand. They don't understand because you're wrong. Right? They don't understand because you're flat out wrong and an idiot. So, anyways, and so the reason they don't understand isn't that they don't understand, is you don't fucking understand. Anyways,
I don't have a problem with people saying it. They just have to understand that you have to deal with the
repercussions. Yes. Anyways, but the other side of that coin, though, to be fair to life and society, is that I do feel like there's a lot of that used to be very fair game things to talk about, right? That I feel like people are now holding in because they're so afraid that people will dump on them, and they will. So yeah, you have to be ready for that. You have to kind of get your mind right to do that, which is also why. And should we have to do that? Well, it's another question that's relevant and valid. You know, should it be that way? But it is though. So, like, should it be that way? No. You should be able to speak freely, and everybody should be really have a lot of grace and empathy for one another, and they should be able to, you know, point out things and, you know, sometimes talk sternly if it requires it, but, you know, all in the spirit of learning and growing. That's how it always.
There's not a lot of grace in
right.
the world.
So again, right? Most people probably laughed when I just said that. They should have.
Yeah, I did
because right, because it's like, oh, we'll never be that. I know. So you have to lean. So okay, so. We'll never be that. So, but you still need to express what you're feeling, right? And when you put it out there, yeah, maybe there's some lessons to learn. So maybe you need to learn some lessons. You can do that really quick. That said, the other side of that coin is, should people be held accountable for a mistake they did when they're 16, when they're 35, and they've clearly grown out of it? No, they shouldn't, unless it's something horrible like a crime of some kind, or, you know, something that was really bad, you know. But ultimately, if it's just a mistake, you said a word, you know, those sorts of things, you know, I think we could have a little more grace for that. I think that's also, people don't, which is why people are lonely and scared and afraid to say what they want to say. And the whole idea that you can't express yourself, I think, causes a massive amount of loneliness in this country.
Well, the one of the things is that there, again, I said the word earlier, there is no nuance anymore. There's not. No. There's not. It's black or white. It's just like people just that, like, there's no gray area. That's all, like, and that's the problem. Yeah. Like, and yeah. So with that, yeah, that with it, and that speaks exactly to your point that you can't have discussions about things because it's like, yeah, it just, yeah. So
right.
Let's get back to loneliness.
Well, but that causes some
controversial subject or whatever.
Right. Like, well, it's a tough subject because I think that there's a lot of things that cause it. You can do it to yourself. Your decisions, if they were bad, can cause that for you. Sometimes you have it done to you. Like in my case, it's that a little bit, right? Sometimes family goes away quick. You know, people, you make decisions that are risky for that reason because you're going to be far away from maybe a small family, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's all sorts of examples of that. Maybe fall in love with somebody, your families don't understand it, so you carve out a life of your own, which you're happy, but there's a little bit of loneliness probably attached to that decision, right? So anyhow, there are lots of factors that influence this that aren't, even beyond things that would be conspiratorial or marketing or propaganda, anything like that. Like literally just life happens, and you can become, or you can just wake up one day and not be content with where you're at in your life. That can cause horrible loneliness, horrific. And if you don't have mechanisms to talk about it, i.e., a therapist, friends, ways to process these thoughts, the awareness that you need to even have some sort of tool at your disposal or some tools at your disposal to do that, you can start looking at things like, things to mask that pain, right? That are unhealthy if you don't know how to do it in a healthy way, right?
Yep.
Just you were alluding to them earlier, like for yourself. Agreed.
Yeah.
And they can manifest in all sorts of different ways, right?
Well, and with that, it's kind of to ignite. Like I'll give it and this is the thing, because I don't give a shit. I'll share. Like my kids, I was, with them. They were at school in town here, and all through preschool, kindergarten, all the way up. Like I got them on, did their hair, got them, and brought them to school. And then once both my kids went to another school system, like who I was dad. Like it's no secret, I love my kids, and that's who I was. But then when they were gone, the thought, and I remember having the thought, and I said, whatever. When your kids are not here, who are you? You've always been dad. That's who you are. Like when they're gone, who are you going to be? And then I'm like, whatever. And yeah, lo and behold, that's where I didn't know who I was. And that's where when the thoughts come and then you quiet them with booze and whatever. But it's that. So one of the CTA to that is that you need to be mindful of where you are. And you need, even if it's harsh, even though it's a conversation you don't want to have with yourself, you need to have that conversation, because I guarantee you at some point you're going to have that conversation. So do yourself a favor, acknowledge what's going on in the moment, and don't push it away, because it will push its way back. I promise you. I guarantee you. I
think the result, I think the return on that one is about 100% that I've seen in my life when people push something away or pressed it down and tried to, make it disappear without acknowledging it or processing it. I'm pretty sure 100% of the time it has come back to bite them tenfold.
I was going to say, and it comes back and it's at least 10. Yeah, you're right. Yep.
So it's not even just an even split for you. It's not even hey, this is going to be shitty as it is. Here we go. Right. That's your best bet if you can even deal with yourself. So if you don't do that, it usually comes back horrifically, and it usually comes back in horrible times. You take it out on people that don't deserve it. You ruin other relationships that have nothing to do with whatever the heck's going on in your head, or you potentially can. Or maybe if you really do a big old whammy, you can screw your job situation up. You can do all sorts of bad things if you don't address the pain or struggle or confusion right away, or as soon as you can. Or if you don't have tools to help you do that until you need to get to something a little bit more serious. Maybe you do need a therapist, or you need to, really look at something more kind of pronounced. If it's something that's plagued you for a long time, or that's really causing some, tremendous harm in your life.
I got something immediate, because most people, we say therapy and they're like, oh, therapy, blah, blah, blah. You know what? At the very least, how about this? Just write. Literally, take a piece of paper and a pencil and write down what's on your brain. I don't know, what makes you happy, what makes you sad, whatever. You want to write about your child, you want to write about anything, just write. But literally dumping your brain on the page will help. So
I look at this show as us taking sort of that thing and going, to the next level with it or whatever, right? That's what I mean by this show is sort of therapeutic for me. And I know it is for you too. When we just talk about things just like this, normal stuff, that's really all we want to do, everybody, is normalize these kinds of discussions.
Right.
And we thought that while we would encourage you to write, talk to somebody, whatever, we were like, well, let's take it to that now. Let's put our, our money where our mouth is, so to speak. Right. Let's get on an hour a day. We talk about this stuff a lot anyways. Aaron and I found ourselves talking about these sorts of things. And then we realized there was a lot of people who weren't talking about these sorts of things. I get it. They're not flashy. Like you can see, we don't have a ton of viewers right here. We're, just kind of grinding this out. My hope is that, we'll continue to, there's plenty of stuff we can do on our end to make sure that more people can see this. But I also hope that if you're out there, you do feel lonely or you're feeling lonely, right? Or just if we could just normalize that this stuff is normal to feel, right? Like that's really all that I would want us to even have a little, even have a little sliver of being able to make sure that somebody out there knows that all this stuff is normal to think, and it's normal to be confused, and it's normal to be messed up. It's normal to be lonely. It's normal to be frustrated, angry. It's normal to be confused. It's normal to not know, to wonder about who you are and where you are at in life. And, these are things that happen all the time to everybody at all ages. As you get older, hopefully you can kind of cope with things a little bit more. You have a little more experience under your belt, etc. But that is not going to stop you from things like loneliness or anger or frustration, or who knows what the hell is going to happen to you in your life. So, ultimately, I don't know. We all should remember that about each other. Might help some folks to not feel as lonely. Might help you to empower yourself to not feel as lonely. Might empower you to, as we like to say, to listen to one of our CTAs and go out there and talk to somebody, or let people know what's going on. Maybe that thing that you've been kind of hemming and hawing about taking care of or getting into or starting, do it. Because that sort of a thing can cause frustration and loneliness too. Maybe there's something you love to do and you're not doing it. And you convince yourself that there's some valid reasons why, but it's just every day all you think about is doing the thing, right? It means you're supposed to do the thing. Do the thing.
Acknowledge that. So acknowledge that loneliness or acknowledge that thought, but acknowledge where you are. Do not just kind of, it's fine. No, it ain't fine. Because if you're saying to yourself, oh, it's fine.
Yeah, that's the kiss of death right there.
I'm fine.
No, I'm fine. It's good. Anytime you hear that, I got you. You're coping is really what they want to say, and I don't feel like talking about it. That's really what that is. Is I'm dealing with this, and I don't really feel like getting into it right now. That's what that means when I say I'm fine. And you can always tell by the tone too. Like if it's a more high register, that might be an opening to say, "Are you sure? Okay, right?" But if somebody's like, "I'm fine," and they're not usually like that, just shut up and move on. They're not interested in speaking about it. Even if they're your best friend, they're not in the mood today. You can tell. So just because you've got that cachet with them doesn't mean you should use it.
When you hear that octave, when you hear the Mariah Carey octave, I'm fine.
Then you can maybe say, hey, what's going on there? I sense a little something. Yeah, they're low and straight and monotone. Move along. It's not. You ain't the one today to help them. So, maybe they'll come back to you later. Hey, I'm sorry I was like that, kind of thing. That happens sometimes too. So anyhow, the CTAs are really just, gosh, continue to try to be yourself. That's hard enough. Let people know what's going on. Don't be afraid to seek help or ask for it if you need it.
Acknowledge your loneliness.
Acknowledge your loneliness. Yes. Acknowledge whatever the heck you're feeling, especially if it's not good. Those are the most important ones. Easy to acknowledge when I'm happy or when I'm smiling and laughing or when I'm excited. Those are fun things to feel. Of course I can. Yeah. I want to talk about them all the time. But the stuff that we don't want to talk about is the stuff we probably should talk about, right? If you are feeling sad and you're not working right, then you're going to want to address that. Otherwise, it can lead to even worse places, like feeling extra lonely or extra mad, and then you're pushing things down. And then we talked about what that happens when you're pushing things away and not acknowledging them, right? They come back tenfold. So again, We're not telling you anything. Like, this isn't Aaron and Brian's rules for being human beings. We're telling you experience. This is what people experience. You know why? Because I've fucked up so many times, and I know that this is the case.
Mm-hmm.
That's how. That's how I know. So.
Yeah.
How do you know? What do you know? I'm sure I've screwed up just as many times as you have, if not more. That's how I know. Don't you know? Yeah, you know. You just don't want to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we're trying to do here, is actually sort of talk about it.
100%.
You know? That's it. You know, we're not better or worse than anybody. I've screwed up plenty of times and still do and still will.
I'm lucky to be here.
That's right. Yeah, me too. You know, so I mean, ultimately, I try to look at life as a blessing. You know, all the corny stuff, all the cliche stuff, it's true.
Yep.
I don't know what else to tell you, everybody. All the corny things, all the things you eye roll at, all the like, oh my God, this again. That's the juice.
It is.
So I don't know what to tell you. That's how you do the things. Is all the corny cliches apply.
And for me, I just have to say acknowledge that's my CTA, acknowledge, because if you ignore, no, that's again, if it comes back tenfold, you're lucky. You're lucky, because most things, when you let them sit there, exacerbate, they just keep going and keep going. You're like, oh, I'm fine. Yeah, they're getting 10 times, 50 times worse. So just saying. And I know whatever my bias, and if people get tired of hearing it, I don't give a shit, because it's my story and I'm going to keep fucking telling it. So I don't care. Just remember this, that alcohol is a depressant. It's not a stimulant. Okay. And it was only until I got sober that I'm like, oh, so I was feeling bad, and then I took something that makes me feel bad, and I couldn't feel better. And I kept doing more of what made me feel bad, because in that 30 seconds it made me feel better or whatever, but then it made me feel, and again, I know that sounds moronic. I know that sounds whatever, and people don't have to live. But I literally thought, like, you know, when you finish, you want to drink and you get like, no, that's not what it does. I mean, it does. It's fun until it's not fun.
Yeah, you're hitting on exactly why. Like, everybody thinks that about their thing. What you just said is, hey, I know it sounds stupid, and I know everybody should know this, but right. No, they don't know it, and everybody feels the same way that you do about their things.
I didn't know it.
Whether it's their alcohol consumption or other habits that are unhealthy, or other ways they're treating people that are unhealthy, or whatever it might be.
You want to know the other stupid one that just moronic? All alcohol is alcohol. I was like, oh, red wine, oh, white wine, then gin, and I'm gonna switch to like a Canadian Club. Then I'm gonna go back to Crown Royal, and it's it's all the same thing.
That reminds me of a lot of rationalizations I heard from alcoholics in my family growing up. Well, bro, I don't drink the hard stuff anymore. It's just the wine and the beer, so we're good. Okay.
And I don't want to get anyone mad. You do you. Like, people who want to drink, that's you. Do you?
I have a drink. I had one. I had drinks this last weekend. It was fun, but like, you got to kind of know them. You got to you have to understand what you're doing, and you have to like put it in its context. And if you can't do that, then yeah, you shouldn't drink. Yeah, that's how that works. If you can't have 3 of them, then you should not drink. That's basically
because 3 sounds like boop, 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 so I don't even know what that's. So yeah
3 just sounds like you're warming up. Yeah, 3 is just like your warm up before you go out. Yeah, that's you're not that, like, you might want to chill out. Exactly.
That's why I don't miss it, because 3 is like, that's a whatever.
Right. CTAs for loneliness, though. Acknowledge.
Yes.
Remind people who you are. Don't be afraid to ask for help. It's a lot of the same stuff. We're just going to keep beating these like a drum until everybody fixes it. So it's going to be a lot of shows. So
because the answer is this: the better you know yourself, the better you can deal with all the world around you and everybody else's shit. The more you know, then you're like, okay, and then you know what your triggers are. You know what makes you happy. You know what makes you sad, glad, whatever. The better you can understand yourself, you're ahead of the game. That's basically
right. Well, know yourself, exactly. Well, and knowing it's time to get out of here, it is. So, Aaron, always a pleasure, brother. And I hope you all enjoyed the conversation today. I know I did. And we'll see you next week.
All right. Later, y'all.
See ya.